fingers are crossed that the Wi-Fi will stay steady and you won't have any issues, but so far we're set up, ready to go. My name is Sharon Lamberton. I am the current president of Wild Ones Greater Richmond chapter. We're a fairly new chapter of a national organization promoting native plants to support biodiversity. We have a lot of colleagues in this area working to promote native plants as well, including the naturalist, of whom Sheryl is a well-known member. And Sheryl's, I guess, the biggest part of your work as a master naturalist is educating people about native plants, and she does a wonderful job. So today she agreed, and Sheryl actually joined us, which was a great vote of support for our group. And Sheryl can tell you a little bit more about some of her other endeavors, but she's here to talk to us today about gardening with native plants in smaller spaces. Let me go over to Sharon.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, everybody back down a little bit. See next thing. There we go. Everybody happy with that? Great. My name is Sheryl Smith. I am a certified Virginia Master Naturalist volunteer. And I'm going to be presenting on native plants for small gardens. When you think of a native plant garden, a lot of times we think of a giant expanse of meadow or a big forest, and not everybody has the space for that. So I'm going to talk about the benefits and beauty of native plants for smaller spaces. All of the photographs that you will see were taken by me in my own garden, unless there's a credit underneath that says somebody else took the picture. I use no fertilizer in my gardens. For the watering of the plants, I try to pick the right native plant for the right place. And since these are plants that evolved here, they were here before humans were watering them and pampering them and protecting them from frost. And they did just fine on their own. I don't, so I only water about the first year to get them settled in. If they still need water after that, I reconsider where they're located. It's rare, I might be out with a watering can doing a little bit of watering on a rare day in the summer, but I don't have irrigation, I don't expose it, it's nothing like that. For most plants, I don't do any soil amending. I plant them right in the soil that's there. I have some areas of my yard with richer soil, and I put potatoes that grow well there. And some plants like this green and gold here. In fact, a lot of these grow well in solid clay. I've got red clay in my yard, and I just dumped them right in the red clay. I never would have thought it would work, and I was nervous at first. I just dumped the plant in red clay, but things have grown really, really well. They evolved to grow in red clay. They're happy. This will be a bilingual class, meaning that for each plant, I have the combination of the scientific name underneath. And if you want to buy the right native plant, you want to get it home, you want to make sure it's what you actually thought it was, you really have to match the scientific name. Because there's things like beauty berries. Go to the store and buy beauty berries, and you might get the Chinese beauty berry, and you might get the American berry. So by asking somebody that knows something, is probably not going to if you buy these plant clothes, carefully check the tag. So always try to check scientific. This is a picture of one little corner of my yard as an example of a small garden. It's about 4 feet by 4 feet. It's got a native ostrich fern, and this is a ground cover that's called a wild ginger. And the leaves are about this big. It kind of looks like a violet in that picture, but it's not. It's got much bigger. There's some native grass, wild grass going up here. So it's one example of what these things do to the small space. I have a half-acre yard at my house, so I have a good bit of space, but not a whole lot. I just want to say a tiny bit about what is a master naturalist, because a lot of people still haven't heard about them. We are connected to the county extension and a bunch of other government agencies, and our focus is not just gardening. My focus is native plants, education. Other people focus on birds, water quality, insects, all kinds of different things. Master naturalists will volunteer to plant native species or invasive species, and do all kinds of work that's beyond the scope of master gardening. And the reason we want to plant native plants is because we want more birds, bees, and butterflies and other wildlife in our yard. If we didn't care about these guys, we might as well just plant non-native plants. But this is what we want to encourage, what we want to have more of in our yard. And briefly, I want to talk about why it's important to plant natives. And the reason is this: we have been taught that these are good bugs, because this is a pollinator and these are important. And we've been taught that this is a bad bug because they eat our plants. And the problem with this philosophy is they're both the same bug. So we have been taught for generations that this is a good bug and we want to feed them, we want to take care of them, we don't kill them. And these guys we kill on sight. And if we keep killing all of the baby caterpillars, or we don't give them anything to eat and let them eat it, we won't have any more adults. The more the world around us is becoming developed, the more it becomes wild places around us are full of invasive species, the more important our own yards are for helping these animals survive. And so that's why we need native plants for caterpillars, because caterpillars need to have the right kind of food. A lot of caterpillars are fussy about what they want to eat. A lot of native bees prefer native plants. They prefer the shape of the flowers. They might be the only ones that reach in and get that nectar with poured inside. And for birds, the best breed to have native plants is for caterpillars, because birds eat berries and they eat seeds. They really need caterpillars for their babies. Babies can't digest seeds and there's not any protein in berries. So you can think of caterpillars as sausages for baby birds. They're easy to swallow, they're full of nutrition, and they're just the best bird food to have. So the more caterpillars we have, the more bird food we have. And now I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about the handout that we have. I'm going to go through all of the plants on the handout in order. I've left a little tiny box there for you to write your own notes. And so we've got the notes area, and the plant name with a common name, if it was one common name, and also the scientific name, the host plant, and the host plant means what caterpillars will eat that plant. The next is different types of pollinators that will benefit from that plant. Next one is various comments, anything I felt like putting in there. Growing information, how big does it get, and what does it eat? Deer resistance. Deer resistance varies a lot. The best thing you can do with deer is choose plants that are deer resistant and find out which ones actually work in your yard, because you can take the most deer resistant plant and the deer eat it in your yard, and they won't eat it in somebody else's yard. The last one is, will it grow well in pots? And this is my estimate based on some experimenting how the plant grows. So one option for a small garden is always to keep things in pots. And you can grow some of the really exuberant plants, like I've got some mountain obedient plant here, which spread like crazy if you put them in the ground. But you can keep them in a pot if you want to have a small garden. I've got an area where I let all three of those guys go wild, and that's really nice. Because the mountain in particular has more pollinators than any other plant that's in my yard. It's fabulous. Okay, so the first plant is maidenhair fern. Some of the ferns that I have spread by runners, and so I just picked out a couple that don't spread by runners. So these spread very slowly, making them good for a small garden. This has a beautiful, delicate look to it. The foliage is kind of a bluish green, and I love the way that the fronds are laid out. They're kind of laid out like a hand. And I put the drawing there so you can see it more easily. Stems are very flat. It's a very attractive fern. Ferns all like shade. And if you look at the caterpillar line for these ferns, I don't have any specific caterpillar listed that will eat this fern, but that doesn't mean that it's not a beneficial plant. Ferns are good for sheltering animals like salamanders and frogs, and some ferns we know are host plants for caterpillars. And scientists are still learning all the time about which caterpillars eat which plants. So there's a lot of things we don't know yet. And if you like a fern and you want to plant one that's a native plant, don't think, oh, I need to plant something that's more beneficial. It's good to have a variety of plants and just pick the natives that you like. Don't be concerned if there aren't specific hosts, caterpillars that will eat that plant. All ferns and grasses are wind pollinated, meaning that they don't benefit pollinators. Very few wind pollinated plants will benefit pollinators. They're designed so that the pollen will blow out in the wind and eventually find its way to their plant and fertilize that plant. The reality is it all goes up our noses, it's just allergies. But that's only certain plants like trees and stuff. But plants that are insect or animal pollinated have pollen that's designed to stick onto the plant. They don't want that pollen to be blown away in the pins. They want an animal to come and collect it and bring it to the flower. So any plant that is insect pollinated or animal pollinated is not going to be an allergy plant. Like goldenrod has a terrible reputation, and it actually does not cause allergies. The problem is that goldenrod is in bloom, people sneeze and they blame the goldenrod, but it's actually a plant called ragweed. That's a wind pollinated plant and it has very indistinct green flowers. You don't notice that it's blooming, but it's the one that's spewing out that pollen. Okay, next plant is the Christmas fern, which is an evergreen fern, which is nice. So it's a nice plant for under trees in that empty mulch area. A lot of people, they want to grow grass under trees or they just have a ring of mulch with nothing in it. And that's a great place to fill up with native plants. Here's the detail of the Christmas fern, and you can see each little bit of a frond has a bump sticking out, and that's unusual in ferns. And if you use your imagination, tilt it sideways, looks a little like a Christmas stocking. So that's how I recognize the Christmas fern is looking for that Christmas stocking. This is how cool the fiddleheads look like when they come up. So they are evergreen, but they put out most of their new fronds in spring. Next category is going to be grass-like plants. I did not include any grasses because a lot of them tend to be much taller. There's sedges, which are similar to grasses. They tend to be and better for a small garden. First one is seersucker sedge, which is a really fun thing to say, seersucker sedge. And it's got a texture like seersucker fabric. You can remember seersucker fabric, which has kind of a bulky texture. They look like that, so they're great for texture. They're kind of a fine green color and they grow well in shade. So they're great for brightening up dark areas in the lawn. It's easy to grow. I got it growing in a pretty dry place. In the spring, it's got unusual flowers, and grasses don't have petals on their flowers. They don't have the same big flowers that way. But they do have very dark black stems that come up, so the flowers are interesting. And this one pairs well with that maidenhair fern, so they kind of green and get bright yellow green there. So if you like a lot of different colors and shade, this is a good native alternative to hosta and want that kind of color and texture for you. The next grass is Pennsylvania sedge, which also likes to grow in shade. The seeds provide food for birds. It stays less than 10 inches tall, so it's a good alternative for variety. Variety is a non-native plant that is on the invasive species list in Maryland, Georgia. And the plant is on the state invasive species list in the state near us. I feel like it's just a matter of time before it's going to be on our invasive list also. Invasive species cause lots of environmental harm to our area, things like kudzu and ivy. And the Virginia Department of Forestry estimates that invasive species cost Virginia $1 billion per year. So if we can avoid growing things that are invasive or going to be on the future invasive list, it's a good idea. They originally thought kudzu was a great idea and the government paid people to plant it. So it's hard to know which non-natives are going to be next kudzu. Anyway, this is a good kudzu alternative. And we don't think of shades and grasses as a good combination, but again, a lot of sedges like to grow. I'm going to move on now to perennial flowers, which is, oh, I'm not. This is a picture of a Pennsylvania sedge in my yard in December. So it doesn't stay totally green, but it's got a lot of good color. Now we can move on to perennial plants. This is butterfly weed is the common name. And there's a famous entomologist, Doug Callamy, who wrote this book and others, Bringing Nature Home. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but before I became a master naturalist and I was just a gardener who was gardening flowers and a few vegetables, I kept seeing this book different places and I was like, boy, I got to read that book. So I did, and it really opened my eyes and just made me rethink everything that I'm growing in my yard. It made me think about creating habitat in my yard versus just growing pretty flowers, and get the thought that I could make change and help animals just by changing what I was planting in my yard really mind-blowing for me and made me become a master naturalist. And that's how I'm here today. It started with that book. So that's a great book to have. And the reason I'm mentioning it, the author, Doug Tallamy, says that we need to have a marketing campaign for some of these plants, like butterfly weed. Nobody wants to plant a weed in their yard. So he says this plant could be called Monarch's Delight instead, because milkweed this is a type of milkweed, the butterfly weed. And milkweed is the only thing that monarch caterpillars will eat. Like I said, a lot of caterpillars are very fussy. And there's a cool connection with the monarchs and the butterfly weed that I will tell you about in a second. This is a monarch caterpillar on a milkweed. And milkweed is called milkweed because when you break open the leaf or a stem, there's a milky sap inside. And that sap is toxic to eat. Most animals cannot eat this plant at all. But the monarch caterpillar has evolved to be able to eat this toxic plant. And they absorb those toxins into their own bodies. So they are now toxic for other animals to eat. And a lot of caterpillars, like I said, are tasty and they're great bird food. Tasty ones are often camouflaged, so they won't get eaten. And they might be looking like a leaf, they might look like a stick, they might even look like bird poop. This guy is obviously brightly colored, they're very distinctive on the plant, and they are actually advertising and saying, do not eat me, I will make you sick. And that's why they're brightly colored. They make no effort to camouflage themselves. They want animals to know they're toxic. And the monarch adults, the butterflies, also have the toxins within their bodies. And the monarch chrysalis looks like this. It's got this beautiful gold, looks like real gold. And people like the way they look so much that people even make imitation jewelry. So those are fake chrysalises you could buy to wear as earrings. But getting back to this plant, this likes dry sun. We've got dry, nasty sun baking things don't grow there. This is a plant that they come up very late in spring, so people think that it's probably dead. Finally, spring up. All of the books are late to come up. I picked this one out of the other milkweeds because this is the smallest one. This is the shortest one. Common milkweed will spread by runners and might need to be contained for a small area, but this is the best small garden plant out of all of the milkweeds. As an example of a successful campaign for a name change, like butterfly weed, have any of you ever eaten Patagonian toothfish? Probably not. Have you heard of Chilean sea bass? They changed the name. It used to be called Patagonian toothfish, and nobody wanted to eat it. So they just changed the name. That's why we just changed this name. It's a common name. Still has Disclepia tuberosa. Oh, and right before the monarch chrysalis opens, they turn clear. So it stays green the whole time the butterfly is developing, and then like a day before it turns clear, and you can see the butterfly inside right before they open up. It's really cool. And if you grow milkweed in your yard, you can see this happening right in your own yard. I was even lucky enough to get a video of a monarch emerging from the chrysalis. Next plant on the list is dwarf-crested iris, which is a very nice plant. It spreads slowly to be a nice ground cover. It's an iris plant that only gets to about 4 inches tall. So it's a nice choice for a small garden. Not evergreen, it dies back to the ground. And if you've got very short plants, it's nice to have evergreen ones because they stay green all winter. And it's nice to have ones that aren't evergreen because they don't care if mulch and leaves get dumped on them. So depending on what you prefer, or you could have both, you get to pick and choose whether you want the deciduous or the evergreen kind of short plants. About 4 inches tall, tolerates dry shade, it's really nice. They pair nicely with azaleas. So if you've got Japanese azaleas in your yard or native azaleas, lucky, and you want to plant something underneath it, you can plant this right around and under your existing azaleas, and then you can add a native plant to your yard. You can also do that with this plant, which is not in the presentation, but I've got several of these. This plant's called green and gold. It's also a nice ground cover for shade nicely under azaleas. And in general, if you've got an empty spot around your foundation shrubs, you can put that with a native plant without making farmers in your yard. This is a close-up of the dwarf-crested iris flower. They're very pretty. And after it blooms, the foliage fills in a lot more. It looks like that. This is a qualifying. So and a native uh, Christmas fern in the background there. These are in no particular order, so we're going to go from dry shade back to dry sun again. Leading star in the actress. This is another one that likes a dry, sunny spot. One thing that's very unusual about this plant is it blooms from the top down. Most plants that have long clustered flowers, they start growing the cluster, and as it grows, the bottom ones are blooming, the top part is still growing. But this one doesn't. It creates the whole cluster from the top down. And in my yard, these spread very slowly, and they're about that tall, but they can get up about that tall at the right spot. Grow this plant. It is a host plant for the camouflage super caterpillar. It is a really cool bug. It's this guy here, and you can see it's purple, so it matches the flower perfectly. But the reason that it's purple is because it bites off the petals from the flower and glues it on its back. It's actually a tasty little green or brown caterpillar. And they are super tiny. They're about the size of a fingernail clipping now. I was really lucky to spot one in my yard. Here it is on a different plant. This is blue, this flower. And each of these little circles right here of flower about the size of the tip of my feet. So the only reason I noticed that caterpillar is because I saw a tiny bit of movement. I looked closely. So excited to see the camouflage blooper. And you can see it's possible also because this flower is all blue or purple and it's got little brown bits here. Because as they glue the petals on, they get old and turn brown, but still stuck on them. So you can kind of spot them that way. They don't. They say, yeah, and they're so tiny. I haven't noticed any damage to the plants. And speaking of damage to plants, if you grow native plants and you want caterpillars to eat them, that means you're going to see holes in the leaves of your plant. And I like people to think about 10%. Think about allowing 10% of a plant to be eaten, or you freak out and say, oh, I'm losing this plant. It's tougher with milkweed because caterpillars will decimate your milkweed, it'll grow back. But in general, think about allowing some bug damage to your plants before just reaching for the insecticide. And I'm not telling everybody have to allow everything in your yard to be eaten if your yard is low to the ground. Nothing like that. Everybody chooses what they want in your gardens. But try to think about it first, and then think about what is causing the damage and what is the least toxic way I can slow or stop the damage to the plant because the damage is too much. Next plant is Virginia bluebells, which are blooming now in my garden. They're really pretty. They've got pink buds and then flowers that look up. There are wild places in woods where there's just big expanses of them. I'm lucky to have like a 3-foot circle of them in my yard. They spread slowly, which is why they're in this presentation. If they spread like wildfire, I wouldn't have them here. I'm trying to avoid plants that are super spreaders. One of the problems with not talking about super spreaders is that when I share plants, like all these came out of my garden, it's a lot easier to share ones that spread a lot. So I don't think I have any of the plants that I'm mentioning. Presentations are on the table because these ones are more difficult to share. So these are spring ephemerals, which means that they're like daffodils. They come up in the spring, they bloom their thing, and they die back to the ground in the summer. Stay dormant until the next year. They're great also for under trees, and they support early pollinators such as mason. The next plant is back to sunny. This one is the creeping phlox or blossoming, which is very popular in this area. It's starting to bloom now, and they come mostly in a bright fluorescent pink, and they also come in purple or white. The straight species plant in the wild type plant is pink, but there are a lot of cultivars. It spreads, but it's easily rolled when it gets to about that tall. It's just a carpet of like foliage. It can be walked on a tiny bit, so if there's a tiny bit of foot traffic, that'll happen. I have this growing where there's a little bit of a wall, so it can flow over walls, it can flow out of a pot and nice happening. If you have lots of room, you can do something like this.
Wow.
I don't know where that is. I just found that picture on the internet, but I give you an example of all the different colors of moss. And it also is an example of what you actually don't want your yard to be. For both visual aspects of it and for benefiting wildlife, we want to try to make sure we have plants that spring and the summer and the fall, and we've got a diversity of species so that there's lots of to support lots of different animals. So this is really cool in the public space, but not a good idea. Yeah, so imagine, yeah, I call it a medium spread. Like bells. I got one clump of bluebells that was this big 4 years ago, and now it's that big. That's very slow in the plant world. Next plant is Phlox tuberculata, blue phlox, and so it's fairly easily available. It's good for shady rock gardens. It's drought tolerant. It's good as well. Dry shade, and it is a host plant for the hummingbird tearaway moth, which looks like this. They look like little hummingbirds, and they sound like lobsters about their tails. But they will eat the leaves of this plant, and they caterpillars have I will show that. Next plant is Eastern Red Columbine. This is the tallest perennial that I've got here, and it makes a clump of foliage about that big, and flowers are above it. Flowers up to about that tall. So it's a tall plant for my small garden presentation. But because of its flowers rising above the foliage, it doesn't look as dense and heavy as other taller perennials look. It doesn't make like a big vast clump. They spread by seed, and they don't spread that much depending on your yard. They might spread a good bit. Seedlings are easy to get rid of, and it's a good thing to have the seedlings because these are very short-lived perennials. They only live 3 years. We've got annuals that live 1 year, biennials live 2, and perennials live from 2 or 3 years to infinity. And this is just one of the shorter lived ones. So it's bad. It's got a beautiful big columbine, and it's gone. There's a lot of cultivars and hybrids for sale of this plant. So if you go to a store, it's going to be tricky to find the real native columbine for this one. So this is one of the ones where you have to be really careful when you're shopping. Anybody have any questions? I'm going along here. Wow, great. I must be doing stuff.
I have found that the non-native columbine still cracked. They don't winter.
And one of the fun things about these is that you might get to see what's called nectar robbing. The plant is designed so that it's a long tooth here, and the nectar is at the very back of the tooth. And the plant wants you to crawl in this way with your feet, go all the way to the back and get the nectar out. When you go by, you brush by the pollen down here. And nectar robbing is some like bumblebees. They're too big to fit in the hole. So they crawl onto the back and bite a hole in the petal and suck the nectar out. Which is pretty cool. And that's fun to see if you're ever looking closely and you see a bee that's at the wrong end of the flower. That's probably what they're doing. The next one is wild geranium. I don't have a lot of deer in my yard. Maybe once a year deer come through. I'll see. But I do have bunnies in my yard, and bunnies do this one. That is a problem if you've got a lot of bunnies. It's a nice, delicate, woodland flower. It's also host for 27 species of butterflies and moths. So there's 27 species of caterpillars that this plant. It's easy to grow, and it's in the shade to tolerate dry wind. It's got very odd looking seed heads. They don't look anything like the flower. You can't even believe that seed head came out of that flower. But that's how they look. This is one that's the flower just died and it grows this big rose thing. Dried up, and that's the seeds down in the bottom there. Next, I'd like to talk about trilliums. There's a few different species of native trilliums, and there's some non-native trilliums too. They're also spring ephemerals, meaning they will die back in the summer. They like a rich woodland soil, so they're not going to be one that you want to dump into a solid clay and they like to grow where there's been year after year of leaves rotting and there's nice compost in the soil. And you artificially create that in cards, but in nature they will be growing where that has been happening over many decades. These guys are pollinated by less common pollinators, things like flies and beetles and ants will pollinate. And the first one I will talk about is the great white trillium, which is the largest of the three, has the largest flowers. And trilliums are called trilliums because each one has 3 petals. There's 3 there, 3 sepals, which are these green leaf-like things behind the petals, and 3 leaves. It's hard to see there, but easy to see here. 1, 2, 3 leaves. They're extremely easy to recognize, see them growing. And each plant, that's all it does. 3 leaves, 3 sepals, 3 petals. They don't put up like a bunch of them or anything like that. If it spreads to a new plant, that new plant, it's going to have just 3. These do not spread in my yard. They're doing fine. They don't spread fine. This here is Virginia creeper. So you can see it's got 5 leaves instead of 3. You like it? I do. I like it as a ground cover. And I also have it growing up some trees. But it is a rambunctious plant, and you have room for it. It's host for over 30 different species of caterpillars. So it is a beneficial plant that also produces seeds or berries that are food for birds. So if you've got it, it's a native plant, it's safe to have. But if you don't have space for it, especially if you have a small garden, you have to pick and choose what natives are going to be growing in your garden. And for me, I will plant just about any native in my yard that I have space for, but I don't allow poison ivy in my yard. I only have half an acre, and I don't allow it in my yard because I'm allergic to it. There's plenty of poison ivy. If poison ivy was an endangered species, I'd be like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And the other thing I don't grow is pokeweed. Pokeweed is a native plant, and a lot of people love it. They think it's beautiful, and they're growing it in their gardens now. But
yeah, well, I should say
it's aggressive. It's an aggressive grower.
Thank you.
Which gets to word definitions. A lot of people use the word, a lot of gardeners use the word invasive for plants that spread a lot. So when you start talking about natives, it's best to use the term invasive only for things on the invasive species. And then that makes it no longer an opinion. This plant is on the invasive species list. You can plant it, you cannot plant it, but it is causing harm. This plant is aggressive. It's a rapid spreader. It'll take over everything. It could be a native plant. It could be kudzu. It's just an aggressive grower and you might not want it in your garden. I don't want the pokeweed because it's got big, thick taproot and reseeds everywhere. And so I'm not just allowing any native plants. So don't feel bad if you say, I don't want Virginia creeper in my yard. It's common all around us. And if you don't have the space or you don't like it, that's fine. So back to trilliums. This is a toad trillium. And last year, this one was covered with little tiny gnats. You can see a few of them here, but it was just absolutely coated with. They really like pollinate this plant. And it's, I guess, called a toad trillium because it's got spots on it. It's got the showiest leaves, but it's got the least showiest flower of all the trilliums. Next plant is one of my favorites because it blooms for the almost the longest time of anything I have in my yard. I think the longest one is the coral honeysuckle, which is a native vine, and it's just really early in the spring until very late in the fall. This plant is different from the typical bleeding heart that you see. The common one that's grown is Dicentrus spectabilis, which gets to maybe this tall, and it's got slightly more showy flowers. They've got yellow in them. And it grows really fast, gets really big, puts out a ton of flowers, and then it dies back to the ground. It's a spring ephemeral. But this one, our native one, it stays awake and alive and happy from spring until fall. It doesn't walk at any time. Walk over and see that it's. This, as the picture says, is in November. It's still a nice thing to have. And it likes shade. And it's also likes a richer soil. I would that in the field. I've had one plant for about 5 years, and I still have one plant. It's gotten a little bigger, but it's a good choice for a small garden. spread and take over. There's another plant that's closely related to it, which is getting ready to take now, Dutchman breeches, which I don't know how that's going to look like, and it's back. It is, and it is the most ephemeral, the spring ephemeral. It is gone by early May. It's coming up now. It's just about to bloom. It's just gone. So it's a nice thing to plant under trees. It's like a shade with soil also, and you can tell that they're related because this one says dicentra, and this one says dicentra. So with plant scientific names, the first name is the last name first. And this is going to be the genus name, general. So this is going to be the general thing. These are both dicentra. And second name is the species name or the specific name. Specific name is usually an adjective, and this one's usually the noun. So this is a translation of that or this one, but the species name will often say something like it's the yellow one, it's the green one, short one, things like that. If I knew all the translations, I would know, start to recognize them like Anna, little, yellow, and that helps with learning which plant is which. Because if you look at this and you say, oh, this is a bleeding heart, and this is a Dutchman's breeches, you don't know they're related. You say they're both dicentra. Then you say, oh, I can see that they're related, and I can see the foliage is similar and the flowers are similar. They talk about how the plants are related. Just a common name. Can't get those connections. Next up is a native sedum. We have native sedum, two species. This one is one I have growing in my yard. It's great for pots. I did have a rabbit come and bow on it last year and have a little cover over it for a few days. They all grew back and it's fine. So it blooms in April, looks about like that. The actual foliage color is somewhere in the, it's not really for photographs. I am not a photographer.
But they're white,
The flowers are white, yes.
because I've seen a lot of yellow, and someone said that's not native.
Yeah, there's
They're
one
bright
that's
yellow,
got,
that's-
yeah, the
it's
yellow
Japanese
one.
or Asian, whatever, not native.
Yellow flowered one I've seen has little needle-shaped foliage, and like all of the sedums, if a piece of this falls somewhere, it can fruit and regrow. So, for another question. Nope. If you have questions, feel free to jump in. And this plant here, the variegated fritillary, is a plant that will benefit from this sedum, the caterpillars that have this in my house. There's no guarantee. Plant something and hope the caterpillars will come and might see them, might not. So I'd like to mention this book while I'm here. If you're interested in books, take a picture of them. This is the life cycle of butterflies, and it's got several species, 23 species or so of butterfly, and for each one it's got a picture of the egg, caterpillar, the pupa, meaning the cocoon or chrysalis, and the adult, and it says what the adults eat and what the caterpillars eat. It's great for children, for adults, and older children. Go through the book and you can say, wow, this is the prettiest butterfly. Let's plant some food, see if the caterpillars come. Great activity. And another perennial is Jacob's ladder. This is just starting at my house now. It's shade loving and it looks delicate, but it's a pretty tough growing plant. It stays to about 1 foot by 1 foot. And it makes seedlings, but very few. I've got about a dozen plants now, and I've been trying to let them grow for about 5 years now. It's a real pretty plant for the shade. And next, I want to start talking about shrubs. And the first shrub is a perennial. And the reason I'm putting it in the shrub category is because a lot of people with small gardens say they want to have a small shrub in their yard. They want to have something that they don't have to prune all the time. And this is a great option for a small shrub. Because it only gets to about 3 feet tall. And it'll never get taller than that. It dies back to the ground and when I turn it to come back again, it's about 3 feet tall. This is a smaller one, medium-sized one. They do get wider than this. I'll show you one thicker in a minute. But it's a great, like I said, a great alternative. That's what we want, a small shrub. It's close to that hummingbird moth caterpillar we talked about before, and that's the caterpillar there. And they look like those big, nasty, ugly, I think they're ugly, and I'm not. The fatal hornworm caterpillar, those guys are just like freaky big. These are little guys, and I love the horn.
Oh, yeah.
And as a garden tip, if you've got a tomato hornworm bug that's decimating your tomatoes, what I do with them is take the caterpillar, and this means I don't want this caterpillar spot, but I take it and put it really far away, because it could be full of parasitic wasps that are benefiting from that caterpillar. They will continue to eat it from the plant. Because again, we want to have caterpillars eating things in our yard, but we also want to grow tomatoes. So for me, that's a good balance. This plant has a nice yellow fall color. And here's a big one in my yard. So it's about 3 feet tall by about 5 feet wide. And this foliage over here looks different. And the reason for that is this is the non-native blue star Amsonia, and this is the native one. So the native one has pretty wide leaves. The non-native is Amsonia rectii, has narrow needle-like foliage. And I leave it in my yard. I've got some now native plants and some native plants, mostly native plants in my yard. But I keep my favorites that are non-native if they're not on the invasive species list. So if something dies and it's not native, I replace it with native. If it's non-native and I don't like it, tear it out, put a native in. But again, if it's non-native, not harming anything, I like my yard.
How about the, so the blue Nile lily?
In the background here, that is the companion, a non-native companion back there. Now we're going to move into some real official shrubs. And the difference between this plant and a real shrub is that a shrub has woody stems like a tree, so it will not die all the way back to the ground. In the picture, it could be deciduous or evergreen. This one is deciduous. And it will regrow from the stems that are left from last year, the branches that are left last year, versus a perennial which dies back to the top. This is New Jersey tea, which is a great native shrub that attracts tons of pollinators. It's got fragrant flowers, grows slowly, that grows to about 3 foot by 3 foot. But I have been learning that it can be tricky to grow. It's tricky to find, and it can be tricky to grow. And sometimes mine has died back into the ground, but it comes back and flowers again. They're supposed to like medium soil and part sun, I believe, and I've got one at a friend's house that I planted for him, and it's in dry, full sun, solid, whitish clay. This is doing great. So you never know. There are no guarantees to success in the plant world, or guaranteed by native plants, and you pick the right native plant for the right place. There are never real guarantees. Next shrub is steeple bush, Spirea tomentosa. And also there's another Spirea that's native, narrow leaf meadowsweet, Spirea alba white. And they both like medium to moist soil. They both get to about 3 feet tall. And this is a good alternative for the Japanese Spirea. It's not as doesn't have as many flowers as the Japanese Spirea, but it's got a pretty shape to it. Oops, go ahead for the shape. But it's got more of a vase-like shape. The Japanese Spirea, rounded shape. The Japanese Spirea is on the Virginia State species list. There are alternatives. And next, I'm going to talk about a vine. And this is a native clematis. There's several native clematis species, and most of them are very small vines. This one might get up to 5 or 6 feet tall. And I wanted to show a few pictures of it because the flowers are so interesting. It can also be kept smaller if you pinch it in spring and branches. It starts off with a green bud that faces up, and then it points down. It's a purple bud that points down. And then it slowly opens up. It's called leather flower because the petals are really thick and it's like a cut leather. When it's done blooming, it points back up again. The bud points up, the flower points down, then flower points up, and it slowly opens up and it turns into these fuzzy, really full things. And those things last for months. So the bloom time is pretty short, but it's decorative for a long time. I've got a little handmade trellis at my, I want to talk a little bit about trees for small spaces. These are not in your handout. But I just wanted to mention trees. If you have a small space and you're looking for trees, you can either choose Virginia native trees that are short, such as our dogwood or redbud, rather than oak tree. Or you can choose a large shrub. This is red chokeberry, Aronia archaeofolia. There's also a black chokeberry. This is a larger one. This one will get to supposed to be like 12 to 15 feet tall. And it's got pretty flowers in spring, and there's red berries there, and obviously the black berries, the dark colored berries. I've got one of them here, and it's even going to flower. The disadvantage to this is it does produce suckers, so it will, have one trunk here, and it'll produce another plant and another plant. So every year I'm removing the suckers from mine. So if you're thinking about something for a small space and it's big, you have to think about spreads like that, because that can there are cultivars of the black chokeberry that are not supposed to produce suckers, and I've got one. It's probably about 5 years old, and it's not produced any sucker that it stayed in one place. And it's a nice, like, mini tree. It's about 6 feet tall and round and very, very pretty. There's also serviceberry. It lists it good to me. Serviceberry, there's a few different species. That's a good tree-like shrub. Native witch hazel is a beautiful small tree or large shrub for shade, and spicewood is a great forsythia alternative. It's got yellow flowers. Now the flowers are not as big as forsythia, but host for that really cool orange caterpillar type too. I am going to done with talking about plants. I want to mention the Native Plant Garden Open House. I organized this event. This will be the third year. This year it will be on 2 dates, because we had a lot of people that wanted to have more time. So it will be Saturday, May 11th. I got a picture of the flyer. Here you can take a picture of it, take a picture of the screen. I've got a sign up sheet there, so if you're interested, you can sign up for it, and I will add you to my email list. And the email list not be shared with anybody. It's only used for this event. And it's also used for a fall native plant swap that I host. You'll need to bring plants to the swap, and take some plants away. And this year, like I said, it's going to be 2 different dates, and it's going to be Ashland and west of Richmond on the 11th, and south of Richmond and central Richmond area on the 15th. It's a lot of fun. Kids go to any house in any order. I will be posting the location, and Sharon was a host. I've obviously been a host, and you just show up and you walk around people's yards and see what people are doing with native plants. And in summary, I'm going to give a summary, and then I'm going to talk about these native plants that are up here. I want the 3 B's, the birds, bees, and butterflies in our yard. Have to give them water and shelter, meaning habitats. We have to plant things for them, and we have to let them eat it. Native plants are the best and easiest way to do that. I even tell people now, don't think about planting a pollinator garden. Because if you think about planting a pollinator garden, you'll have some pretty flowers, and birds and bees, or birds and butter, bees and butterflies will come, and then you feel like, okay, I'm done. Think about a habitat garden. You're going to think about, what will the baby butterflies eat? Where will the animals overwinter? What can I do in my yard? I'll let the leaves stay on the ground, because then I can have habitat for them all year round. What am I going to do for water? You can start thinking about all different ways to make your garden good habitat. It's a much bigger concept than just thinking about pollinator garden. So in summary, again, we've seen a lot of pictures of my garden. I use no fertilizer, no winter care for anything, barely water. I've planted over 180 species of native plants in my yard, and you've seen less than 20 of them. Planting natives is rewarding, helps birds, bees, and butterflies. Regarding these plants, there's enough for everybody to get a plant, and there will be enough for more than one plant. So when we're done, you can come up and pick up a plant like one. Excuse me. So I've got this shrub here. these first three are spreading plants, so I've got a note next to each one, so they would be good as pots. And then these others are good for shade, there's brown covers. I've got bags here, so if you take a plant, you can put it in a bag and not make it hard dirty. If you pick one of these, you can take a picture of this, so you can go home and remember what it is. And I'm going to leave you with a quote. Reframe your relationship with bugs. Insects are the bread and butter of the natural world if they're dying out. Think of your yard as ground zero of the entire local chain. Think of caterpillars not as the enemy of the tomato vine, but as food for the mockingbird whose babies are hungry. That's by author Margaret Rainfall. Anybody have any questions? If you do, you can always come up.
I do have,
Yes, okay.
the butterfly,
Mhm.
where's that available? That's gonna take for a while.
I had to get it online.
Okay.
They are, the native others are hard to find.
But I know Sands Plants has a lot of native. Of season.
And there's a whole bunch more native sellers than there used to be. And if you take my card and send me an email, I'll give you, I've got a list of all the growers and a whole bunch of internet links where to get plants. Anybody that wants more information like that, if you want links to certified plants, find out what's native, that kind of thing, send it to me. I don't hand it out because it's out of internet links. And you can type always there.
We also have some questions
Yes.
on the web.
Okay.
Oh, cool, right, I forgot.
Yes.
Hi, new people.
Yeah, there's Karen, Kyle, Lori, Lynn, Mary Ellen, Shauna. We have so many people. Thank you so much for being patient. A question about Iris cristata. I have a patch that's been very aggressive, which makes me think I've misidentified it, and it's just a lookalike. Any thoughts on what it could be?
I don't know of any lookalikes for Iris cristata. It is not spread quickly in my yard, and quickly is perception too. If I have a patch that's a foot wide, it could be 2 feet wide in a year or two. So it's definitely a medium spreader. So I would say that probably is what it is. If the leaves match and the flowers match, it's a pretty unusual combination. I would say that's probably what we've got.
Okay.
You could use some of the apps that are out there like iNat, try and narrow it down.
I've had it spread really thick in a damp area.
Is it a damp area? This question was from, let's see, Diane. Well, we'll see. And we'll also email the Zoom folks your handout